Bionic Dance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
In your conversations with other people about Christ and Christianity and the real important things, you are going to encounter what I call the question. That is the question that stops most Christians in their tracks, and they don't really quite know how to deal with it.
You'd think the question would be, can you prove it? Oddly enough, nope, apparently not. All right, let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. Bionic Dance here. Stand to Reason is such an ironic name for this video channel, especially since their arguments can't stand up to reason. If they could, the comment sections on their videos wouldn't be disabled. I'm just saying.
And the question was posed to me in a hour-long TV debate that I had with Deepak Chopra, the New Age guru, as we talked about spiritual things. And what he said to me is, so you're saying that anyone who doesn't believe just like you is going to hell?
Okay, that's the question. And it's a good one, because that sure does seem to be their message, doesn't it?
That's the way he put the question. Now, some people have said if you're careful how you push the question, you could win any argument. And the problem here is that this was a question about the exclusivity of Christ, a critical issue in Christianity, but it was put in a way that made me look really, really bad.
Aw, Poopsie. Do you suppose that if you could be made to look really bad, that maybe there might just be something bad about your premise that needs fixing?
So if I would have answered the question, yes, unless you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, then you will die in your sins, you will go to hell, I would have answered correctly, but I would have really given the wrong impression. I would have fulfilled a really negative stereotype that people have of Christians, and I would have played right into Deepak Chopra's rhetorical hand, and I did not want to do that.
But was he wrong? He wasn't wrong. That is part of the Christian premise. You might want it to seem more sweetness and light, all fluffy bunnies and kittens, but it doesn't change the fact that no matter any other factor, people absolutely have to toe your party line to avoid eternal punishment. And your party line requires believing in something which has no factual, demonstrable basis. Almost like some sort of carrot and stick philosophy, a do what you're told no matter how absurd and unproven, or else proposition. In other words, the only way Christianity can hold on to its audience. Fear.
And so in that particular circumstance, I sidestepped the issue.
Wow. He admits it.
But we can't always sidestep that issue, and nor should we. We need to address it because it's really, really important. But how do we do that? And this is where the tactical approach, I think, is really golden, especially using the Columbo tactic in its third sense, and that is using questions to make a point.
Or, in this case, as you'll see, using questions to lead the witness. His tactic is the sort that can only work on people not prepared to answer beyond yes or no. It would fall apart against any answer that insisted upon nuance.
Now, here's a case where I want to lead up to the point. I want to make the point by making a couple of steps. I have a choice at this point. I could go ahead and state my steps as part of my argument, put my pieces on the table, so to speak, and then come to a conclusion, which leaves me with a certain liability. Every time I make a claim that is a stepping stone to my conclusion, the other person, especially if they're a little bit belligerent, can just deny the claim. And now I get nowhere.
Which apparently tells him nothing. Laying out the case openly and in a forthcoming manner gets him nowhere. And so he's got to be sneaky about it, try to work around people's criticism and incredulity, their distaste for the premise. This really ought to be a sign that his religion isn't exactly how he sees it.
So instead, I am going to use questions to get those pieces placed on the table by the other person. Because if they put those pieces on the table, it's a lot harder for them to take them off, to deny them, okay? Let me show you how that works with the question, all right? And this person who asked the question, they're at the Barnes & Noble. I said, when he offered the question, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? No, go right ahead. Here was the first question I asked. Do you think that people who commit moral crimes ought to be punished? In other words, do people who do bad things, should they pay for them?
Clearly, he expects a yes-no answer to this question. But anybody who knows me would know that I'd be derailing him right from the start. I'd ask him what a moral crime actually is. I'd ask how we determine that, and what if people don't agree that certain things even are moral crimes. This isn't a prevarication on my part. I'm sure his premise of moral crime comes from the Bible, a source with which I take issue, and if we've not defined our terms, I cannot give him an honest answer. If we ever settled that issue and got back to his question, I'd say, sure, I think people who hurt others ought to face some sort of comeuppance. Of course, I think moral crimes are those which hurt others, rather than simply behaving in a manner others would rather not see or even be aware exists, or having thoughts which others find objectionable regardless of any real-world action or lack thereof resulting from them.
Most people have this sense, this deep intuition that people who do wrong things should not get away with them, okay? And so I agreed with him. I agree that people who do wrong things ought to be punished. So now we've got a piece on the table. He put it there because I asked him the question. Second question, have you ever done any wrong things? That's personal, right? What do you think he said? He said, yeah, I guess I have. I agreed with him. So have I.
But this leaves out a very important question. Did you face any kind of judgment or punishment? Did you set right what you had done wrong? Did you go to jail? Did you apologize? Did you pay for what you broke? Did you get away with these wrong things you did? Or were you punished?
And then I said, now we got another piece on the table. And so I said to him, look at where we come just in two questions. We both agree that people who do bad things ought to be punished, and we both agree that we've done those bad things. You know what I call that? I said to him. What? He said. I said, bad news. This is not a good picture for us. Now, do I need to tell this man he's a sinner? No. He just told me. Do I need to tell him that he's under judgment? No. He just told me.
No. You asked whether he thought people ought to be punished for their misdeeds. What wasn't asked is whether they will be. Sometimes people get away with shit, and that's just tough noogies. The notion that there's some judging skylord who sees and knows all, and who sees to it that all will pay for their crimes, might be a comforting notion, but it's not one which has ever been shown to be so.
Now, he wasn't thinking about that when he walked into the Barnes & Noble. But when I asked him a couple of simple questions that brought these moral intuitions, moral common sense really, to his awareness, he laid them right on the table. Now I've got something to work with.
In other words, as I said, leading the witness. It won't work on somebody who's prepared for it, who will, as I've done, point out the flaws in his premise, what was left out of his questions, who does not simply sheep along with him. I find myself wondering how he'd get around such skepticism and incredulity, if he could. And we'll probably never know, because, as I said, the comment sections on these videos are always disabled, making questions impossible.
It's as if the judge is about to lower the gavel on the two of us in the dock, and we both know we're guilty, and we both know we deserve what we're going to get. And then the judge pauses and says, by the way, are either of you guys interested in a pardon at this point?
A judge we're forced to assume exists, since there's no evidence for such a creature.
Look, when you know you're guilty, you're much more open to an offer of forgiveness. And that's exactly where I wanted to bring him.
You remember what I said before about carrot and stick, that fear was the only way Christians could hold on to their audience. Are you beginning to see where I was going with that?
And then I explained in very simple terms about substitutionary atonement, that the judge took off his robe and got in the dock and took the punishment for us so that we could be set free.
So people weren't punished for their wrongs. They did the crime but didn't do the time. Where's the justice? And when it comes to this substitutional atonement, we're not even talking about misdeeds these people did. We're talking about so-called original sin done by Adam and Eve. Let's not get started on how flawed a premise that is, not in this video, which could not be washed away in any other manner. This is such a big, huge, spiderwebby mess, and I doubt anybody could make the least sense of it. Many have tried and failed when their position was subjected to critical scrutiny.
because that's what God has done in Jesus. And that's why Jesus is the only way. He's the only one who solved the problem. Nobody else could do this. Only Jesus could. And that's why we have to put our confidence in him.
Which doesn't make any sense at all. Let's suppose for a moment that it's all true. Original sin, Jesus dying to save us, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Why does it now require our faith and our belief to reap the benefits? Jesus died for you, and if you're not his biggest fanboy, you'll be punished regardless of any other factor. And not just punished forever in eternal agony. And it's not enough to think the Jesus story is nifty. You have to believe it's all true, and do so solely on the basis of ancient writings done by people with next to no knowledge of the universe and its properties, many of whom apparently wrote their theme papers without having actually been witness to the event upon which they're reporting, coupled with translations through multiple languages. If one is at least a bit intellectually honest, one is forced to swallow all of this with a grain of salt the size of a phone book.
If we're really guilty, then there's got to be a solution to the guilt problem.
Why? Why does there have to be? I can understand wanting one, but that doesn't mean it exists. It might just be tough noogies. Who says life is fair?
And that's what Christians offer in Christ. God becoming a man to take the guilt upon himself, so that we can be forgiven. That's the reason Jesus is the only way. He's the only one who solved the problem. And this is one way of getting to that vital point, by using a tactical approach.
And this sidesteps the question again. Have a look.
So you're saying that anyone who doesn't believe just like you is going to hell. Why do I need to believe in Jesus?
The question is not whether Jesus was the only one who could accomplish these feats of spiritual atonement. The question is why, after the fact, we need to believe in his existence, or else. If I manage to put out a fire and prevent a building from burning down, do its residents, former, current, and future, have to believe in my existence in order for it to stay unburned? If I were to save someone from being murdered, do they need to thank me for the rest of their life, or else the murder will happen to them anyway? What he's saying is not merely that Jesus saved us from sin, but that there's still an admission price to safety, and that price is blind faith, obedience, allegiance. The act of vicarious rescue wasn't enough, and he's trying to put a nice face on it so it doesn't look quite so much like a mafia protection racket. I wish there was a way to hold his feet to the fire, to get him to answer honestly and completely. But, as I said, the coward has turned off his comments. Weenie. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is Bionic Dance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think. Ignorance killed the cat. Curiosity was framed.